Members of the U.S. House of Representatives are back on Capitol Hill, continuing the search for the next speaker. It's been 3 weeks since Representative Kevin McCarthy was ousted from the role, and House Republicans dropped Jim Jordan of Ohio as their nominee on Friday. Majority Leader Steve Scalise failed to make the cut as well the week before. I'm Stephanie Haney, and in this edition of In the News Now, we look at what's happening in the House, possible speaker nominees, and how the chaos is impacting other operations around the country. We start with a breakdown of the House Speaker standstill. Andrew Bartline spoke with Dr. Charles Hunt, a political science professor at Boise State University, to learn more about the turmoil surrounding the House and possible paths forward.
Lamborn.
A tedious tally might move more like a monotonous monologue.
Lamborn.
Interjected by jabs
Jeffries.
in a mostly two-horse race.
Jordan.
With scattered votes collecting
Levin.
in the margins.
I think McCarthy was the first.
Keeping a close eye.
That's not going to look good in the Wikipedia article.
Is political science professor Charles Hunt.
Speaker battle this pitched hasn't occurred since the 1850s. The House of Representatives only has an acting speaker who does not have a lot of powers and who cannot bring issues and votes to the floor. And so basically the House can't do anything right now.
A clear problem in the headlights of a high-ticket agenda.
This potential looming government shutdown, aid for Ukraine on the table, getting aid for Israel on the table as well.
A group of Republicans joined force with House Democrats to out former Speaker, California's Kevin McCarthy. The move was criticized by Idaho Representative Mike Simpson for, quote, having no plan after their destructive vote.
For these far-right Republicans, McCarthy wasn't conservative enough.
And evidently, neither was his pending replacement, Louisiana's Steve Scalise.
A number of Republicans, they feel he was essentially railroaded, that he won this first sort of secret ballot vote within their conference to be their nominee for speaker, but they turned on him and decided to go with Jordan instead.
But Idaho's rep?
Simpson.
Won't break loyalty.
Scalise.
Despite the heir himself.
Scalise.
Bowing out.
Jordan.
Simpson's holdout has drawn criticism from the Idaho GOP, calling his actions disappointing, a delay tactic, and a protest vote.
The state Republican Party can't make Mike Simpson do anything he doesn't want to do. He's ultimately only answerable to his voters at the end of the day.
The second path could be the nomination of a new Republican frontrunner.
If it couldn't be McCarthy, if it couldn't be Steve Scalise, and if it can't be Jim Jordan, it's hard for me to imagine what Republican in the House actually exists who really could pull all of these folks together.
That brings us to the third option, unorthodox, but possible.
Give the current acting speaker, Patrick McHenry of North Carolina, additional powers at least for the next 50 or 60 days. That is something that I could see happening as kind of a stopgap solution until Republicans are ready to choose a longer-term speaker.
There are now at least 9 new candidates in the running for Speaker now that Representative Jordan is no longer a possibility. But there is no sign yet if any of them can get the 217 votes needed to claim the job. And in the middle of all this turmoil in the House are 2 Florida representatives, Matt Gaetz, who led the push to get McCarthy out, and John Rutherford. As Rich Donnelly reports, Gaetz and Rutherford may be in the same party, but their views on leadership are quite different.
The chair declares the House in recess, subject to the call of the chair.
For the foreseeable future, that won't be the last time that North Carolina Representative Patrick McHenry bangs the speaker gavel. He's currently the interim Speaker of the House, in part because of the actions of 2 Florida representatives, Matt Gaetz and John Rutherford.
I mean, this is pretty much uncharted territory, but, it reflects the strength that Florida's Republican delegation has. It's 20 people. So it's roughly 1/10 of the Republicans in the House.
Gaetz represents Florida's 1st congressional district in the Western Panhandle. Rutherford represents Florida's 5th congressional district, which encompasses parts of Duval and St. Johns counties. FloridaPolitics.com writer A.G. Gankarski says that other than their party affiliation, they're very different people.
Gaetz and Rutherford are pretty ideologically removed in many ways. I mean, different generations, different orientations ideologically. Gaetz was never in the Freedom Caucus, but he aligns with Jim Jordan, who obviously is Freedom Caucus.
The push to make Ohio Representative Jim Jordan the new Speaker of the House is where Rutherford pushed back on his fellow Republican. On Wednesday, Rutherford released a statement saying, quote, "Representative Jordan is fiddling while the world is on fire," end quote. Rutherford called for a consensus candidate for Speaker of the House, an unlikely outcome considering the battle lines already being drawn by members of the same party.
I blame it on gerrymandering. It empowers the extremes on both sides. So somebody like Matt Gaetz, who seems like a bomb thrower, actually has a disproportionate sway.
The new candidates for House Speaker will speak to House Republicans in a closed-door forum before an internal conference vote on Tuesday. One of the lawmakers vying for the position is House Majority Whip Tom Emmer of Minnesota. Danny Spiewak has more on Emmer and his run for the role.
17 days ago, hardline Republicans ousted Representative Kevin McCarthy as House Speaker. Louisiana's Steve Scalise and Ohio's Jim Jordan have since failed in their bids to replace him.
We need to come together and figure out who our speaker is going to be.
Now, Minnesota Representative Tom Emmer is eyeing the speaker role. As the majority whip, he's the third-ranking member of the House GOP and already has the support of McCarthy.
It makes sense to me that Tom would come in and be the guiding force.
Former Minnesota GOP Senate leader Amy Koch.
So Tom understands the base of the party.
Served with Emmer in the state legislature.
What would you say his odds are of getting the speakership?
Well, I don't know if anybody can in this environment right now. The numbers are so very, very tight in the House. But if anyone can, I think it's Tom.
Emmer represents Minnesota's deeply conservative 6th congressional district, where Trump got 59% of the vote in the 2020 presidential election.
I think he appeals to both those that are more moderate, as well as sort of the MAGA folks to the right. I think Tom can do both.
At least a dozen Republicans are expected to challenge Emmer. After Jordan's failed third bid on Friday, Democratic Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries blasted the GOP for essentially shutting down House business.
The chaos, dysfunction, and extremism has to end.
Without a speaker, the House can't act on military aid to Israel or Ukraine. Plus, the temporary budget measure to keep the government running expires next month.
We can't keep kicking that can. So desperately needed.
The other candidates vying for the top position in the House are Dan Muser from Pennsylvania, Gary Palmer of Alabama, Kevin Hern of Oklahoma, Byron Donalds from Florida, Pete Session of Texas, Jack Bergman of Michigan, Mike Johnson of Louisiana, and Oskin Scott from Georgia. Steve Scalise pulled out of the running for the House Speaker after realizing he couldn't pull together enough votes from House Republicans to secure the gavel. Paul Murphy spoke with Scalise after he dropped his bid about the issues inside the GOP-controlled House.
Louisiana Congressman Steve Scalise told WWL-TV at an election event in Metairie Saturday night, House Republicans are having a lot of internal issues that doomed his chances of becoming House Speaker after winning the nomination last week.
But you do have a small core of people that only want their person, and if it's, again, the perfection, if it's not my guy, I'm not going to vote for anybody else. That is where the wall was hit. And that wall still is there right now, by the way, and so we've got to break through it.
Scalise, the current House Majority Leader, took a harder line in a guest column published in the Times-Picayune New Orleans Advocate. He said, frankly, some folks need to look in the mirror and decide, are we going to get it back on track, or are we going to continue pursuing personal agendas? You can't do both. It's unclear if Scalise had fellow Louisiana Congressman Garrett Graves in mind when he wrote that line. The Baton Rouge Republican told reporters after Congressman Kevin McCarthy was ousted as Speaker, I think this whole narrative about every member of the existing leadership taking one step up is BS. Graves still has not revealed whether he supported Scalise for Speaker.
For whatever reasons, whatever petty grudges he might have or harbor, he would not come out and say, I'm for Steve Scalise. And that is really surprising. It was very damaging to Scalise, and Graves has to know that.
Saturday, Graves told WWL-TV Scalise ran into some challenges.
It would be fantastic having a speaker from Louisiana. I think what's most important is these people have got to stop being agents of chaos, and they've got to focus on what we need to be doing as the United States Congress.
Far-right conservative Jim Jordan from Ohio was nominated for Speaker after Scalise pulled out of the race. Congressman Mike Johnson from North Louisiana has also expressed interest in the job. Scalise says reaching a consensus on Speaker is going to take more work.
We still only have a 3-seat majority, so clearly every thread of a needle can collapse any coalition.
In the meantime, WWL-TV political analyst Clancy Dubose says Graves may have to explain to his constituents why he didn't publicly endorse Scalise.
They need flood protection. They need levees. They need hurricane protection. They need relief from flood insurance rates. And Graves was up there not helping the guy who, as Speaker, could have delivered on a lot of that.
According to his office, Congressman Graves took the exact same position as other Louisiana delegation members to support Scalise on the floor. Scalise pulled out before the full House could vote on whether to elect him as Speaker. Paul Murphy, Eyewitness News.
Food banks across the country are watching what's happening in the House very closely as they need a farm bill and the government budget passed to help keep food on the table for community members. But until there is a speaker, those votes are on hold. Sydney Persing spoke with the president of a food bank in Fort Worth, Texas, about the impact the House standstill is having on the fight against hunger.
That the total number of votes cast is 432.
Tuesday, House Republicans tried again to elect a new speaker and failed.
A speaker has not been elected.
Again. 1,300 miles away in Fort Worth,
we have been watching very closely.
The president of a food bank is bracing for the impact.
Without the farm bill being passed, we're blindsided.
The farm bill houses all federally funded nutrition programs and is due for reauthorization. But Congress hasn't gotten to that yet, tied up without a speaker. So Julie Butner, president and CEO of the Tarrant Area Food Bank, has no idea how much money she'll be working with next year or when she'll find out.
We don't really know how we're going to be supported by the federal government going forward. So it makes it very difficult to anticipate and prepare for the future.
The bigger threat, though, Butner told me, the looming threat of a government shutdown, possible after November 17th if lawmakers can't make a deal.
And that is not only a disaster for families, it puts food banks in a really tough spot.
Jared Williams is the food bank's VP of advocacy. A shutdown, he said, would not only slow the food bank's funding, but also pause food assistance programs that feed folks in need.
Food banks have experienced a perfect storm.
If that happens, the food bank expects an influx of those people, plus any furloughed employees to rely on them, on top of the record number of folks they are already working to serve.
My hope is that our elected officials get their act together.
In Fort Worth, I'm Sydney Persing.
Until a new Speaker of the House is voted into place, the chamber remains effectively frozen. This is all against the backdrop of the threat of a government shutdown next month and the conflict unfolding abroad in the Middle East and in Russia and Ukraine. We will continue to keep watch over the vote for Speaker of the House and bring you updates as we learn more. Thank you for watching this edition of In the News Now. I'm Stephanie Haney.